Darius Jenkins, a 28-year-old black delivery driver, starts his day early. His tall, lean frame moves swiftly as he prepares for another busy shift. His warm brown eyes, framed by wiry glasses, exude a mix of exhaustion and determination. Darius has always prided himself on being reliable, often the first to step up when others hesitate. Born and raised in a modest neighborhood on the city's outskirts, Darius embodies resilience. He grew up with his single mother, who worked tirelessly as a nurse. Watching her sacrifices instilled in him a deep sense of responsibility. Though Darius often jokes with friends about becoming the king of deliveries, he harbors dreams of something greater, opening his own logistics company someday. But for now, every package delivered represents a step toward that goal. His life revolves around simple pleasures: the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the rhythm of old-school R&B on his car radio, and the occasional quiet evening playing chess with his younger brother, Jamal. Darius's life may seem ordinary, but his heart beats with quiet determination. Darius's mornings start at 5 a.m., his alarm buzzing him awake in a small apartment shared with his brother. The cramped space is neat, a testament to his disciplined nature. After a quick breakfast of toast and eggs, Darius dons his uniform, a navy blue shirt with Swift Go Deliveries emblazoned on the chest. His truck, nicknamed Big Bertha, is his second home. It rattles down familiar streets as Darius navigates potholes and rush-hour traffic. Each stop presents a different story: the cheerful barista who always waves, the grumpy businessman who never tips, and the kids who run excitedly to grab their packages. Despite the monotony, Darius treats each delivery with care. He knows his customers depend on him, and he prides himself on punctuality. But the job isn't without challenges. There are the impatient honks when his truck blocks a narrow street, and the occasional stares that remind him of the subtle prejudices he faces. Yet, he handles it all with quiet composure, focusing on the bigger picture: a brighter future for himself and Jamal. The city Darius calls home is a bustling mix of charm and chaos. Narrow streets wind through neighborhoods dotted with brownstone houses and small corner stores. Vibrant murals cover aging brick walls, telling stories of resilience and culture. Despite its rough edges, the city has a heartbeat, a cacophony of laughter, honking horns, and street musicians playing soulful melodies. Darius often drives through contrasting neighborhoods. In some areas, he sees sprawling lawns and immaculate homes, a stark contrast to the more modest apartments with peeling paint and cracked sidewalks where he grew up. His regular delivery route takes him past landmarks like the old clock tower downtown, bustling farmers markets, and the shimmering riverwalk where couples stroll hand in hand. At home, Darius's apartment complex is a microcosm of community life. Neighbors chat on balconies, kids play basketball in the lot, and Mrs. Walker, the elderly woman next door, waves at him every morning. Though he longs for a bigger place with fewer leaks and more space, Darius finds solace in the familiarity of his surroundings. This city, with its blend of beauty and hardship, mirrors Darius's own life, a mix of struggles and hopes, resilience and dreams. As Darius parks Big Bertha outside a quiet suburban street, he feels a sense of unease he can't quite explain. Deliveries here are usually quick and uneventful, but something about today feels different. He brushes the thought aside and grabs the package from the back, ready to move on with his day. Little does he know, this stop will be anything but ordinary. It will challenge his patience, test his kindness, and ultimately change his life in ways he could never imagine. It was an unusually bright morning when Darius pulled up to a small, weathered house nestled between two newer properties. The lawn was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters was peeling, a clear sign that the homeowner had either given up or couldn't manage the upkeep. Darius stepped out of his truck, package in hand, and approached the front door. He rang the bell, then knocked lightly, expecting no more than a quick signature. After a long pause, the door creaked open, revealing a frail, elderly woman with thinning silver hair and eyes that held a mix of wisdom and weariness. "Good morning, ma'am. I've got a delivery for you," Darius said, flashing his usual polite smile. The woman squinted at him before smiling faintly. "Oh, thank you, young man," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She reached for the package, but stopped halfway. Would you mind bringing it inside? It's heavier than I expected. Darius hesitated. Strict company policy discouraged entering customers' homes, but he could see her hands trembling as she clutched the doorframe for support. Against his better judgment, he nodded. Of course, ma'am. No problem at all. As he stepped into the dimly lit house, the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of old wood and faded memories. Stacks of newspapers and unopened mail cluttered the corners. The walls were adorned with faded photographs, each frame telling a story of a life lived long ago. Just set it on the table, please, she said, pointing to a cluttered dining table. As Darius placed the box down, she smiled warmly. Thank you. You're very kind. Before he could leave, she added, I hate to trouble you, but would you mind helping me with something else? Darius glanced at his watch. He was already behind schedule, and he knew his boss would be quick to reprimand him if his deliveries were late. Yet, looking at the frail woman struggling to stand, he couldn't bring himself to say no. Sure, he said, his voice calm but firm. What do you need? She led him to a small kitchen, where a carton of groceries sat on the counter. I just need these put away, she said apologetically. My arthritis. It's gotten worse. Darius nodded and got to work, arranging cans and boxes neatly in the cupboards. As he moved, he couldn't help but notice little details about the house. A dusty piano in the corner, a stack of yellowed letters tied with a ribbon, and a faded photo of a young woman who looked remarkably like the elderly woman before him. You don't get much help around here, do you? Darius asked gently. She chuckled dryly. Not since my husband passed. It's just me now. My children. Well, they have their own lives. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken loneliness. By the time Darius finished, nearly 20 minutes had passed. He glanced at his watch again and sighed, realizing the delay would mean rushing through the rest of his deliveries. As he prepared to leave, the woman stopped him. Wait, she said, reaching for a small tin on the counter. She opened it and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. For your trouble. Darius shook his head. That's not necessary, ma'am. I'm just glad I could help. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, she looked as though she might cry. You're a good man, she said quietly. The world needs more people like you. The words struck Darius unexpectedly. He'd heard compliments before, but there was something about the way she said it that felt deeply genuine. As he left, a strange sense of unease settled over him. Something about this woman and her home felt incomplete, like there was more to her story than she let on. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a connection that would alter his path in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The next day, Darius found himself thinking about the elderly woman. Something about her lonely demeanor and cluttered home stuck with him. As he navigated his delivery route, he couldn't shake the feeling that she might need more help than she was letting on. Later that afternoon, he was surprised to see her address pop up again on his delivery list. This time, the package was heavier, a large, rectangular box. When he arrived, she greeted him with a warm smile, her face lighting up in a way that made Darius feel strangely at ease. Oh, it's you again, she said, as though they were old friends. He carried the box inside without her asking, and as he set it down, she hesitated before speaking. I hope I'm not bothering you, she began. But would you mind taking a look at something for me? My television stopped working, and I've been missing my shows. Darius agreed, following her into the living room. The outdated TV sat on a wooden stand surrounded by old VHS tapes and photo albums. As he fiddled with the wires, she hovered nearby, chatting about her favorite programs and the neighbors she used to know. You remind me of someone, she said suddenly, her tone wistful. My husband was kind like you, always helping people. The words hung in the air, adding a layer of poignancy to their interaction. When Darius finally got the TV working, she clapped her hands like a child. Bless you, she exclaimed. As he left, she handed him another envelope. For your time, she said firmly, refusing to let him decline. This time, inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for being a light in my life. That evening, Darius recounted the encounter to his brother Jamal over dinner. Jamal, a sharp-witted college student, raised an eyebrow. You're telling me you went inside a stranger's house? Twice, Jamal said, shaking his head. She's not just anyone, Darius replied, his voice defensive. She's old, man. She needs help. Jamal leaned back in his chair. I get it, but don't let people take advantage of you. You can't save everyone. Darius dismissed the comment, but Jamal's words lingered. At work the next day, his coworker Marcus chimed in after Darius mentioned the woman again. Man, you're too nice for your own good, Marcus said, chuckling. Be careful. People have all kinds of secrets. Despite their warnings, Darius felt an inexplicable pull to check on the woman again. It wasn't just kindness, it was curiosity. Something about her story didn't add up. As the week went on, Darius found himself returning to her house after his shifts, sometimes just to chat or help her with small tasks. Each visit revealed more about her life. She had been a pianist in her youth, loved gardening, and once dreamed of traveling the world. But the more she shared, the more questions arose. Why was her house filled with unopened mail? Why did she avoid mentioning her children? And why did she keep glancing at a locked cabinet in the corner of the living room? Darius felt torn. On one hand, he knew he was crossing professional boundaries by getting involved in a customer's personal life. On the other, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that she was hiding something important and that she needed someone to listen. One evening, as he sat at home, he found himself staring at his delivery schedule for the next day. Her address wasn't on it, but he considered stopping by anyway. Why am I so caught up in this? He muttered to himself. The answer wasn't simple. Maybe it was because she reminded him of his late grandmother, who had raised him with stories of resilience. Or maybe it was because, in her quiet vulnerability, he saw parts of himself, the yearning for connection, the hope that someone would care enough to look deeper. During his next visit, the woman seemed unusually quiet. As Darius prepared to leave, she stopped him. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice trembling. Darius felt his chest tighten. He nodded, waiting for her to continue, but instead, she gestured toward the locked cabinet in the living room. Next time you come, I'll show you what's in there, she said softly. It's important. As he left, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that cabinet would change everything he thought he knew about her, and perhaps himself. The next evening, Darius finished his route early and decided to stop by the elderly woman's house. She greeted him at the door, her demeanor unusually somber. Her trembling hands clutched the edge of the doorframe, and she motioned for him to come inside without a word. Once they were seated in the living room, she pointed to the locked cabinet. It's time, she said. I've been holding on to this for too long. Darius hesitated as she handed him a small brass key, her eyes filled with both fear and relief. His heart pounded as he approached the cabinet, unsure of what he might find. The lock clicked open, revealing a collection of old photographs, letters, and a worn leather journal. These are memories of my husband, she explained, her voice breaking. He was everything to me. Darius sifted through the items carefully. One photograph caught his attention, a younger version of the woman, standing beside a tall black man in a military uniform. That's Frank, she said, her face lighting up with both pride and sorrow. He fought in the war. We fell in love despite everything. Darius could see the pain in her eyes as she continued. But when he came back, he wasn't the same. He struggled, and I couldn't save him. As Darius leafed through the journal, he realized it wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a chronicle of her husband's struggles and triumphs. Frank had faced discrimination both in and out of the military, often battling the weight of societal prejudice while trying to provide for his family. One entry stopped Darius in his tracks. To the man who finds this, thank you for being the kind of person I always wanted to be. If you're reading this, you've helped my wife in ways I couldn't. Please know that your kindness means more than you'll ever understand. Darius felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the woman, who nodded. Frank wrote that years ago. I kept it because I always hoped someone like you would come along. Her words hit Darius like a tidal wave. He'd been helping her out of a sense of duty, but now he realized it was something deeper. Fate, perhaps, or a chance to fulfill a promise made by a man he'd never met. Darius sat back, overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions, gratitude, sadness, and a newfound sense of purpose. The elderly woman, whose name he now knew was Margaret, reached out and placed her hand on his. "You've done more for me in these past few weeks than I can ever repay," she said. "And I think Frank knew. Somehow, he knew you'd come." For the first time in years, Darius felt truly seen. His whole life, he'd been helping others, hoping it made a difference. Now, he realized that his actions, however small, had a ripple effect, touching lives in ways he couldn't always see. As Margaret shared more stories about Frank, Darius began to see parallels between the man's struggles and his own. Both had faced adversity, but where Frank had been consumed by it, Darius was determined to rise above. By the time he left that evening, Darius's perspective on life had shifted. Margaret's trust in him, and Frank's words from beyond the grave, gave him a sense of responsibility he couldn't ignore. He promised himself he'd continue to help her, not out of pity, but out of a deep respect for the life she'd lived and the lessons she had to offer. In the weeks that followed, Darius became a regular visitor at Margaret's home. What began as simple deliveries turned into shared meals, heartfelt conversations, and a friendship that neither of them had expected. Darius repaired her leaking faucet, trimmed her overgrown hedges, and even brought Jamal along one weekend to help clean the cluttered attic. For Margaret, Darius's presence brought new life into a home that had felt like a prison of memories. She began playing the piano again, her fragile fingers finding notes she hadn't touched in years. Darius often sat nearby, listening to the hauntingly beautiful melodies that filled the house. But Darius didn't stop with Margaret. Inspired by her story in Frank's journal, he started paying closer attention to the people on his delivery route. He began leaving handwritten notes of encouragement on packages and offered small acts of kindness, like carrying heavy boxes or simply sharing a kind word. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors began waving more often, and customers smiled brighter when they saw him. Darius's growing connection with Margaret also inspired changes within his own family. He and Jamal started having deeper conversations about their goals and struggles. One evening, over a chess game, Jamal admitted he'd been considering dropping out of college due to financial pressure. "You're not quitting," Darius said firmly. "We'll figure it out together." Motivated by Margaret's resilience and Frank's legacy, Darius began taking steps to achieve his own dreams. He researched business grants and local mentorship programs, determined to turn his dream of owning a logistics company into a reality. Meanwhile, Margaret found ways to give back as well. She began donating items from her home to local charities, including Frank's old military gear, which she hoped would inspire younger generations. He'd want these to be put to good use, she told Darius with a proud smile. One afternoon, as Darius sat on Margaret's porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, he thought about how much his life had changed in just a few months. Helping Margaret had started as a simple act of kindness, but it had grown into something far greater. "She's like family now," he thought, smiling as Margaret brought out 2 cups of tea. He realized that life wasn't just about achieving big dreams. It was about the small, everyday choices to show up for others. Frank's journal had taught him that even the smallest gestures could create ripples of hope and connection. As they sat in companionable silence, Margaret looked at him and said, "You've given me more than I could ever repay." Darius shook his head. "You've done just as much for me," he replied. Weeks later, Margaret handed Darius a package to deliver on her behalf. Inside was Frank's journal, tied with a ribbon, along with a note. "Pass this on when the time is right." Darius accepted it with a solemn nod, feeling the weight of the trust she'd placed in him. As he drove away, the journal sat on the passenger seat, a constant reminder of the power of kindness and connection. Months later, as Darius stood in front of a small office bearing the sign Jenkins Logistics, he thought of Frank and Margaret. Their stories had become a part of his own journey, pushing him to build something meaningful, not just for himself, but for the community around him. As he unlocked the door to his new business, he whispered, "This is for you, Frank, and for everyone who believes kindness matters." If this story touched your heart, remember the power of kindness and how small actions can make a big difference. Share this video with someone who might need a little hope today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and remind us all of the good in humanity. Thank you for watching. Together, let's spread positivity and create ripples of kindness. See you in the next one.